Inside the marble lobby of Gilded Oak Trust, CEO Rosalind Keene was one signature away from a $420 million deal when three armed men shattered the front doors and forced everyone to the floor. Amid the screaming, she noticed a black single father named Kellan Baptiste, clutching his daughter's backpack, unnervingly calm. He did not shake. He did not cry. He simply nudged a chair out of place with his foot like he was following a plan only he could see. And that single, quiet motion made Rosalind wonder who this man really was. If you love true-to-life stories where the quietest person in the room turns out to be the strongest one, hit subscribe now because you will not want to miss where this one goes. Rosalind Keene had built her reputation on being the calmest person in any room, and that morning, walking into Gilded Oak Trust, she expected nothing to test that reputation. She ran Keenebridge Technologies, a security firm headquartered in Fairborn, North Carolina, and she had spent the better part of a decade convincing investors, boards, and rivals alike that she never lost control of a situation. Money solved problems. Lawyers solved the rest. That was the world she had built for herself brick by brick, and she trusted it completely. The deal on the table that morning was worth $420 million, an expansion agreement that would push Keenebridge into markets she had been circling for years. She arrived at the private bank early, dressed the way she always dressed for moments like this, sharp enough to remind everyone in the room exactly who was in charge. The marble floors, the brass fixtures, the hush of old money. All of it felt like an extension of her own certainty. She barely noticed the man who walked in a few minutes behind her. He wore a jacket that had seen too many winters and shoes that had been resoled more than once. In one hand, he carried a small navy backpack, the kind a child might use for school, and in the other an envelope thick with cash. His name was Kellan Baptiste, and he had come to the bank for a reason far removed from mergers and acquisitions. His daughter Nola was waiting on a surgery date at a children's hospital across town, and the balance on her bill still needed closing. A teller's eyes lingered on him a beat too long as he approached the counter, the kind of look that sized a person up and filed them away without ever meaning to be cruel about it. Rosalind caught the exchange from the corner of her eye and did not think twice about it. To her, the man with the backpack belonged to a different world entirely, one that did not intersect with boardrooms or expansion deals, and she turned back to her own affairs without a second glance. What she could not have known was that Kellan's eyes had already swept the lobby the moment he stepped through the security doors, cataloging exits and camera angles with a precision that had nothing to do with paying a hospital bill. It was a habit buried so deep in him that he barely registered doing it anymore, a reflex left over from a life he had walked away from years earlier. He had traded that life for quiet mornings, school drop-offs, and the particular ache of raising a daughter alone after losing his wife. He liked the quiet. He had fought hard for it. Nola's illustration of a lopsided sun was tucked into the front pocket of the backpack, and he touched it without thinking, as he waited in line the way other people touched a phone or a set of keys. She had drawn it the week before, insisting the sun needed a face because, in her words, everything felt friendlier with a face on it. He smiled faintly at the memory, and for a moment, the bank lobby. The line, the pressure of the unpaid balance, all of it receded behind the simple thought of his daughter waiting for him to come home with good news. He had left the apartment that morning the way he left it most mornings, checking twice that Nola's stuffed rabbit was tucked under her arm before the babysitter arrived, checking the stove, checking the lock, running through the same short list of small certainties that made the rest of his day feel manageable. Nothing about the drive to the bank had felt unusual. Nothing about the line, the marble floors, the low murmur of transactions being processed around him had given any warning of what was coming. That was the part he would think about later, how ordinary the morning had felt right up until it wasn't. That fragile calm lasted exactly as long as it took for the front doors to shatter. The sound came first, a violent crack of glass followed by shouting that seemed to come from everywhere at once. 3 men in masks moved through the lobby with a speed that suggested rehearsal, one of them slamming the entrance shut behind him, another leveling a handgun at the nearest security guard before he could reach for his radio. The third screamed for everyone to get down, and the elegant hush of Gilded Oak Trust collapsed into chaos in under 10 seconds. Rosalind hit the floor along with everyone else, her pen still in her hand, the expansion contract fluttering somewhere beneath the table. Her phone was kicked away before she could reach for it. She watched her security detail get forced to his knees, watched the lawyers who had flown in for this deal press themselves flat against cold stone, watched investors who commanded rooms just like this one shrink into silence. For the first time in longer than she could remember, her title meant nothing. A gun did not care what her signature was worth. Face down near the teller counters, Kellan kept both arms wrapped around the backpack, pressing it close the way he might have shielded Nola herself if she had been standing there. To anyone glancing his way, he looked like every other terrified customer in that lobby, shoulders tense, breathing shallow. But underneath that stillness, his mind had already started working, sorting the room into pieces the way it used to during briefings that felt like another lifetime. He noted the camera housed above the lone officer's desk still blinking red despite the chaos, and a service hallway just past the far pillar that most of the hostages hadn't even registered. He noted the way the gunman near the door kept adjusting his grip, uneasy with the weight of the weapon in his hands, a small tell that separated someone experienced from someone in over his head. He filed all of it away without moving a muscle, the same way he used to before every operation that mattered. Rosalind, from her position a few feet away, found her attention drifting toward him despite everything else demanding it. Every other hostage in that lobby had the same wide, frozen look, the look of people whose bodies had simply stopped knowing what to do. Kellan's eyes moved instead, slow and deliberate, tracking the room like he was reading a document rather than living through one of the worst moments of his life. It struck her as strange enough to cut through her own fear for a second, a small crack in the panic that let curiosity in. The leader of the three men barked orders in a voice roughened by adrenaline, and it did not take long for someone to identify Rosalind by name, whispering it just loud enough for him to hear. His name, they would later learn, was Maddox Crane, and the recognition changed something in his posture immediately. He crossed the lobby with the kind of confidence that came from knowing he had just found leverage, hauling Rosalind up by the arm hard enough to make her stumble. He announced to the room and to her specifically that if police showed up outside those doors, she would be the first to die. The words landed with a weight that made the silence in the lobby feel physical. Rosalind searched the faces around her, looking for anyone who might offer some flicker of help, but every gaze dropped the moment it met hers. Fear making cowards of people who an hour earlier might have described themselves as brave. Somewhere behind her, one of the lawyers who had flown in for the deal whispered a prayer under his breath, and an investor near the window pressed a hand over his mouth to keep from making a sound. The room had gone from a place of contracts and handshakes to a place where survival depended entirely on what the next few seconds held, and Rosalind felt the full weight of that shift settle over her. Kellan did not look away this time. He watched Maddox drag her back toward the center of the room, watched the way her jaw tightened, even as her hands trembled, and something in him recognized the particular kind of fear a person felt when control was ripped away for the first time in their life. He had seen that look before on people who had never once imagined themselves as anyone's victim. He understood with a clarity that unsettled even him that he was standing at the edge of a decision. Moving too soon would get someone killed. Doing nothing might get Rosalind killed anyway, and once she was gone, the rest of the hostages would become nothing more than leverage for whatever came next. He thought of Nola then, just for a breath, the hospital room waiting for her, the surgery still unpaid, the promise he had made himself the day she was born, that he would always come home to her. That thought did not paralyze him. It steadied him. He shifted his grip on the backpack and let the envelope of cash slip from his fingers, the bills scattering loud enough to draw a flicker of attention from the gunman standing nearest him. It looked to anyone watching like the clumsy panic of a frightened father losing his composure under pressure. Bending to gather the bills gave him 3 full seconds of cover, and he used every one of them. His foot found the leg of a chair near the teller counter and eased it sideways just enough to angle it into a path that would matter later. His hand brushed the velvet rope meant to guide customers into line, pulling it low enough to become an obstacle rather than a boundary. In the same motion, his fingers found the phone in his jacket pocket and pressed the record function through the fabric, never once lifting the screen into view. None of it looked like anything. That was the point. A man rattled by fear, fumbling with dropped cash, adjusting his footing out of nervous habit, nothing more. But Rosalind, still held upright by Maddox's grip on her arm, saw all of it happen in sequence. And unlike everyone else in that lobby, she understood immediately that she was not watching panic. She was watching preparation. Something shifted in her chest as she registered it, a strange, disorienting mixture of fear and something close to hope. An hour ago, she would have walked past this man without a second thought, filing him away the same way the teller had a stranger whose life did not intersect with hers. Now, on her knees on marble floor with a gun somewhere behind her, she found herself watching him the way she used to watch her best analysts searching for the plan hidden beneath the surface. She did not know his name yet. She did not know what he had once done for a living or what it had cost him to leave it behind. All she knew in that suspended, terrifying moment was that the quiet man with the child's backpack might be the only reason any of them walked out of that lobby alive. The vault, when Maddox finally reached it, did not hold what he expected. He had planned for stacks of cash thick enough to fill duffel bags, the kind of haul that justified the risk of a daylight robbery in a private bank. Instead, he found reserves far leaner than anticipated, the bulk of the institution's wealth locked away in electronic transfers no gun could touch. The 6-minute plan he had walked in with started falling apart in front of him, and his frustration curdled fast into something more dangerous. He turned that anger on the room. Dragging Rosalind toward the security camera mounted above the main desk, he forced her to her knees in full view of the lens and shoved a folded paper into her hands, a statement blaming the bank and the police for whatever happened next. He told her that one wrong word, one shaking syllable would cost someone in that lobby their life. Rosalind, who had spent years commanding rooms with nothing but her voice, now found her hands trembling around a piece of paper she had not written. She read the words slowly, forcing steadiness into a voice that wanted to break, aware of every eye in the lobby watching her fail to be the person she usually was. It was the first time in her adult life she had been ordered to perform obedience rather than authority, and the humiliation of it burned almost as much as the fear. She finished the statement without a single stumble, though her pulse did not slow for a long time afterward. Kellan watched the exchange from his position near the counter. His attention split between Rosalind and the youngest of the 3 gunmen, a lean, jittery figure the others called Des. Where Maddox moved with the confidence of someone who had done this before, Des kept glancing toward the rear exit like he was counting the seconds until he could leave his grip on his weapon loosening and tightening in a rhythm that betrayed exactly how far over his head he was. Kellan recognized that pattern immediately. Fear made some men reckless. It made others desperate to be anywhere else, and desperation like that could be turned into an opening. He understood something else too, something that shaped every decision he made from that point forward. This was not a room full of professionals executing a clean plan. It was a room held hostage by men who were losing control of their own operation, and men losing control tended to make mistakes that got people killed rather than mistakes that ended things quietly. That distinction mattered more than anything else in the lobby right now. The obstacle in front of him was not the gunmen themselves. It was everyone standing between him and them. An elderly customer near the entrance had not moved in minutes, frozen in a way that worried Kellan more than the shouting did. A teller with a visible gash above her eyebrow sat pressed against the wall, blood drying along her collar. Investors who had flown in for Rosalind's deal lay flat against marble that offered no comfort and no cover. Any move made too early, too loudly, or too clumsily would not just fail. It would turn this lobby into a massacre. So he waited. And while he waited, he watched Maddox's patience continue to erode with every minute that passed. Without the payday he had promised his crew, the 3rd gunman, a heavy-set man named Reese, pacing near the entrance and checking the street outside more often than the room he was supposed to be guarding. It came to a head when Maddox decided the vault had given him nothing worth staying for, and that Rosalind herself would become his way out a hostage valuable enough to guarantee safe passage through whatever police perimeter had already formed outside. He hauled her toward the door, and in that instant, with seconds standing between an ordinary robbery and a hostage situation with no clean ending, Kellan spoke for the first time since the doors had shattered. He said the vault they had cracked was never the real target, that Gilded Oak Trust kept its serious assets in a private bond storage room beneath the building, a space reserved for clients whose net worth existed in numbers most people never saw. Maddox turned toward him slowly. Suspicion written across what little of his face showed beneath the mask, and Kellan held his stare without flinching. He kept talking before the suspicion could calcify into dismissal. He mentioned a maintenance code printed on a badge near the service hallway door, a detail he said he remembered because he had once serviced the building's climate systems in that exact basement corridor. He gave a name, too, a technician called Ray Odom, who used to have access to that level, and suggested Maddox ask the wounded guard by the door whether that name meant anything to him. The guard, still pressed flat against the marble with blood soaking through his shirt, lifted his head just enough to confirm it in a shaky whisper, saying, "Yes." That name sounded right, that a man like that used to come through on service calls. It was a small thing, barely more than a nod, but for a man as impatient and greedy as Maddox, it was enough. Rosalind, watching from a few feet away, felt something tighten in her chest that had nothing to do with fear this time. She understood immediately that Kellan was not telling the whole truth, that whatever he actually knew about that basement had been stretched and reshaped into something more useful for this exact moment. She did not understand yet what his plan was, only that he had one, and that it involved putting himself directly between Maddox and everyone still lying on that floor. It was a strange thing to feel gratitude and terror in the same breath, but that was exactly what moved through her as Maddox made his decision. He grabbed Kellan by the collar and pressed the barrel of his gun into his back, ordering him to lead the way, calling Des to follow, while Reese stayed behind to hold the lobby. Before he was pushed toward the service corridor, Kellan's eyes found Rosalind for one brief second, no words passing between them, nothing that could be explained if anyone had been watching closely. She understood it anyway. He was turning himself into the very thing that might get him killed, and he was doing it so the rest of them had a chance. For a moment after Kellan disappeared down the corridor, the lobby felt emptier than it had any right to feel, with so many people still lying across its floor. Rosalind found herself measuring time by her own heartbeat, counting seconds. She had no way of confirming, aware that whatever was happening beyond that hallway would decide the fate of everyone still kneeling beside her. She had spent her career trusting numbers, contracts, projections she could hold in her hands. None of that experience had prepared her for trusting a stranger's plan she could not see. Rosalind spent the next several minutes trying to become useful in the only way left to her. She kept Reese's attention fixed on her voice, drawing on the same calm authority she used to close deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, except now she used it to ask small human questions instead. She asked if he needed water. She asked if the injured teller could be given something to stop the bleeding. It was not resistance in any way that could be punished, only enough friction to slow things down to keep the room from tipping into panic while Kellan bought them time somewhere out of sight. Down in the service corridor, Kellan moved with deliberate slowness, claiming pressure sensors and secondary locks required careful navigation, all of it invented on the spot to stretch the walk into something longer than it needed to be. Along the way, he let a single coin slip from his pocket at a turn in the hallway, letting it roll toward the wall without drawing attention to it. He nudged a restroom door until it sat slightly ajar and reached up to tap an old mechanical smoke alarm mounted near the ceiling, one that ran independent of the building's electronic security and had likely been forgotten by whoever disabled the main system. Beside him, Des kept glancing over his shoulder toward the direction they had come from, and Kellan used the silence between them to ask quietly whether there was somewhere Des still needed to be someone waiting on him who had no idea where he was right now. The question caught Des off guard enough that his steps faltered for a moment, his eyes flicking toward Kellan with something that looked almost like recognition, like nobody had spoken to him as a person in longer than he could remember during this entire ordeal. Kellan filed that reaction away too, the same way he had filed away everything else since the doors first broke. Des did not answer the question directly, but something in his posture loosened for the length of a few steps, the tight grip on his weapon easing just slightly, as though being spoken to like a person instead of a threat had reminded him he still had a choice in how this ended. Kellan noticed the shift and said nothing more about it, filing it away the way he filed everything else. Patient, unhurried, waiting for the moment it might matter. They reached a narrow stretch of hallway fitted with a heavy steel door and a working interior camera, the kind of choke point Kellan had been steering them toward from the beginning, hoping to seal Maddox and Des inside long enough for the police already gathering somewhere beyond the block, based on the sirens Rosalind had faintly caught through the shattered front doors to force their way in. But Maddox had grown too sharp with suspicion to keep following blindly. He stopped walking, studying the length of the corridor, studying Kellan's steady, unhurried answers, and something behind his eyes shifted from irritation into certainty. He said in a voice gone flat and cold that no maintenance worker moved the way Kellan moved, that no frightened father spoke with this kind of precision under a gun. He shoved Kellan against the wall and pressed the barrel beneath his jaw, demanding the truth, demanding to know exactly who he was really talking to. At almost the same instant, Des's radio crackled with static, and behind it came the unmistakable warble of the mechanical smoke alarm Kellan had triggered minutes earlier, a signal Maddox had never accounted for because it did not run through the systems he'd disabled. Through the thick steel door, faint but unmistakable, came the wail of sirens gathering outside the building, closer now than before. Whatever plan Maddox thought he still controlled collapsed in that instant, and Kellan understood immediately what came next. Maddox screamed into his radio, ordering Reese to fire on a hostage, to send a message loud enough to make the police think twice about storming the building. Kellan heard it through the static, heard the fury behind it, and understood that somewhere above them, aimed at someone who had done nothing but exist in the wrong building at the wrong hour, a gun was about to go off in seconds rather than minutes. He was trapped in a narrow hallway with two armed men, a blade now visible at Maddox's hip. No way to reach the lobby, no way to warn Rosalind, no way to stop what he had just set in motion the moment his plan slipped out of his hands. Every choice that had gotten him this far, every quiet, careful movement designed to protect the people in that lobby, now stood on the edge of costing one of them their life instead. There was no more room left for patience and no version of himself left to hide behind. The blade at Maddox's hip caught the corridor light for only a second, but it was enough. Kellan moved before Maddox's grip could tighten around it, driving his elbow up into the arm holding the gun beneath his jaw, knocking the barrel wide in the same motion that broke him free of the wall. The shot that might have ended everything went into the ceiling instead, plaster raining down around them as the sound cracked through the narrow hallway. Des lunged forward on instinct, more reflex than decision. But the question Kellan had asked him minutes earlier still seemed to be sitting somewhere behind his eyes. That half-second of hesitation was enough for his foot to catch the coin Kellan had dropped earlier, and the restroom door, left slightly ajar, gave his shoulder nowhere solid to brace against. He went down hard, more from the weight of his own uncertainty than from any blow, and Kellan used the opening to press him flat against the tile without needing to hurt him further. Maddox came up from the fall, enraged blade now drawn fully swinging wide, in a motion built more on fury than precision. Kellan felt the edge catch his forearm, a line of heat opening across his skin, but he did not let it slow him down. He grabbed the strap of Nola's backpack, still slung across his own shoulder, through all of it, and looped it around Maddox's wrist hard enough to redirect the momentum of his next swing straight into the steel door beside them. The door, triggered by the same struggle that had thrown Maddox against its frame, slid shut, with a heavy mechanical finality sealing him inside the narrow stretch of hallway alone. His shouting turned muffled almost instantly, swallowed by steel built to withstand far more than one man's rage. Kellan stood on the other side of it, breathing hard blood soaking into his sleeve, aware that the fight in this corridor was over even as the one in the lobby was not. Above him, through walls and distance, he could not close in time. Reese had received Maddox's order and was raising his weapon toward a bank employee frozen near the teller counters. Rosalind, still kneeling where she had been forced down, remembered every small thing Kellan had arranged before he disappeared down that corridor. The chair angled just slightly out of place, the velvet rope pulled low across the floor. She did not think. She simply moved, driving her foot into the base of the chair and sending it skidding into Reese's legs. He stumbled, his balance already compromised by the rope catching against his ankle, and the shot meant for the teller went wide into the ceiling instead, echoing through the lobby as plaster dust drifted down onto marble, already scattered with dropped cash and shattered glass. In the same instant, the tactical team stationed outside breached the front entrance, moving in formation through the broken doors and closing the distance before Reese could recover his footing. He was on the ground and restrained within seconds, the lobby finally suddenly silent, in a way it had not been in over 20 minutes. Down in the service corridor, Kellan helped Des to his feet without a word of anger in it, guiding him toward the officers now flooding through the rear access point. What struck everyone who arrived first was not simply that the robbery had ended, but how it had ended with the man most of them had overlooked when they first walked into that lobby, standing at the center of every decision that mattered. Outside, the street had filled with flashing lights, and the low murmur of a crowd kept back behind police tape phones raised to catch whatever footage they could of a morning that would be replayed on local news by evening. None of that noise reached Kellan yet. His focus stayed narrow, fixed on the ache in his arm, the weight of the backpack against his leg, and the single thought that now that the danger had passed, he needed to get to Nola before she woke up and wondered why he was late. Paramedics moved through the building within minutes, tending to the wounded guard, the injured teller, and eventually Kellan himself, who sat on a low concrete step near the rear exit, while someone wrapped his forearm in gauze. He did not ask for anyone's attention. He did not offer his name to the reporters already gathering at the police perimeter outside. When an officer finally approached him with a clipboard of questions, all Kellan asked in return was whether he could leave soon because his daughter was waiting for him at the hospital and had been waiting long enough already. Rosalind found him there a short while later, the backpack he had carried through all of it now resting against his leg, one strap still faintly stained from the fight in the corridor. She had spent the last several minutes speaking with a detective who filled in pieces of the picture she had only guessed at during the standoff that Kellan had once worked crisis response for an international civilian protection unit, that he had spent years on hostage recovery operations before walking away from that life entirely after losing his wife, choosing instead to raise Nola somewhere quiet and far from the work that had once defined him. Standing over him now, Rosalind understood why he had not looked afraid in that lobby the way everyone else had. Fear was not unfamiliar to him. He had simply learned a long time ago how to keep moving through it without letting it decide anything for him. She thought of her own hands shaking as she read Maddox's statement into that camera and felt something close to embarrassment sit beside her gratitude, though he had never once made her feel small for it. She did not go home that evening. Instead, she drove across town to Harbor Light Children's Center, standing outside a hospital room door for longer than she meant to before finally stepping inside. Kellan sat beside Nola's bed, his bandaged arm resting carefully against the blanket, reading aloud from a picture book, in a voice so gentle it was hard to believe it belonged to the same man who had disarmed two grown men in a service hallway only hours earlier. His hand trembled faintly as he turned the pages, not from pain, but from the fear he had not allowed himself to feel until now, once his daughter was finally safe in front of him. Rosalind offered quietly to cover the remainder of Nola's medical bill in full. Kellan set the book down and told her plainly that he did not want pity, that he had never asked anyone for anything he could not earn on his own. She told him this was not pity, that it was respect, and that she owed him an honest acknowledgement of something she had gotten wrong the moment she first saw him walk into that lobby that morning. She admitted she had looked at his jacket, his shoes, the quiet way he carried himself, and decided within seconds that his life did not intersect with hers in any way that mattered. Kellan did not respond with anger. He only said that people tend to see exactly what they have been trained to see, nothing more, and that most of the time it costs them very little to be wrong about a stranger. It cost her more than she wanted to admit, standing there in that hospital room, realizing how close that morning had come to a very different ending. Nola, half asleep against her pillow, asked in a small voice whether her father had really saved a whole bank, and Kellan told her gently that he had mostly just tried to make sure everyone got to go home the same way he always tried to make sure she did. Rosalind watched the two of them together, the ease between them, the way Nola's hand stayed curled around two of her father's fingers, even as her eyes drifted shut, and understood that whatever title she carried back at Keenebridge, none of it had prepared her for a morning like this one, or for the quiet correction it had handed her about the kind of person she had assumed Kellan to be. The following months brought changes to Keenebridge Technologies that few people inside the company had expected. Rosalind quietly shut down a luxury security initiative that had existed mainly to serve clients who already had more protection than they needed, and redirected those resources into a crisis response training program offered free of charge to schools, hospitals, small community banks, and neighborhoods that rarely made it onto anyone's list of priorities until something had already gone wrong. She asked Kellan to help lead it, and for the first time since walking away from his old life, he did not refuse outright. He agreed on one condition: that the program prioritize the places most often overlooked, the underfunded schools, the public hospitals, the communities nobody thought to protect until tragedy forced the issue. Rosalind agreed without hesitation, understanding by then exactly why that condition mattered to him more than anything else on the table. At the program's public launch inside Fairborn Civic Hall, Rosalind stood before a room of reporters and told them the story of that morning honestly, without shaping herself into either a victim or a hero. She told them that the calmest person in that lobby had not been the wealthiest, the most powerful, or the most protected. He had been a single father. Most people in that room would have walked past without a second thought, the same way she nearly had. Kellan stood near the back of the hall, uncomfortable with the attention, until Nola tugged his hand and told him in the plain, unfiltered way only a child could manage that she was proud of him. He stepped forward then briefly and told the room that courage rarely announced itself loudly. Sometimes it looked like staying calm while everyone else fell apart. Sometimes it looked like a chair nudged a few inches out of place. Sometimes it simply looked like choosing to stand up even after a lifetime of being looked past. He added almost as an afterthought that he had spent years trying to leave that version of himself behind, believing that walking away from danger was the only way to keep his daughter safe. What that morning at Gilded Oak Trust had taught him instead was that safety was never really about avoiding danger altogether. It was about the people willing to stand between danger and everyone else, whether or not the world ever noticed them doing it. Rosalind, Kellan, and Nola left the hall together that evening, no longer defined by the roles they had carried into that bank months earlier, a CEO and a stranger she had once dismissed without thinking twice. What remained instead was something neither title nor money could explain: a quiet understanding that in the moment life demanded the most from a person worth was never measured by status. It was measured by the steadiness of the heart carrying them through it. If this story reminded you that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the strongest one, that judging too fast can cost you the truth about someone, then let it stay with you the next time you walk past a stranger and think you already know their story. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this one, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that real courage rarely shouts. It just shows up steady when it matters most.